You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns. Welcome to Chakras and Shotguns, the podcast that guides you on a journey of spiritual development and personal preparedness. I'm Jen, a former lawyer, a yogi, and a human design lover.
And I'm Mik, a marketer, wellness retreat leader, and prepper. There's this scene in one of my favorite movies, The Bourne Identity. Can't believe that came out in 2002. But in the movie, Matt Damon's character, Jason Bourne, is sitting in a diner. And he goes on to describe in very great detail exactly what is going on around him. He tells the license plates of the 6 cars that are in the parking lot. He notices that the waitress is left-handed. He identifies the guy at the bar and knows about how much he weighs and how he could handle himself in a fight. He's able to find the best place for a gun, and he knows exactly how fast he can run at the present altitude. Now, this is a very extreme example, but it highlights one of the most underrated aspects of preparedness, and that's situational awareness. In today's episode, we'll dive into all things situational awareness and talk about how you can improve your situational awareness by practicing some simple exercises. On the surface, this qualifies as more of a preparedness topic, but there are some implications for spirituality that we want to touch on.
I'm excited to get into that. But before we do, we want to let you all know about our Patreon page. We offer amazing perks, including exclusive content and a monthly session or reading with me or Mik. Definitely check it out. You can go find us on patreon.com/chakras and shotguns.
Thank you, Jen. So are you ready to do some breath work?
Yes, it's your turn today.
Yes, I'm up. So for today's breath work, guys, we're going to do a little visualization. The idea is to put us in a place where we can utilize our 5 senses. And hopefully this is a place of comfort for you that you can take with you. So let's get into it. Let's all sit up nice and straight. We'll close our eyes and start with some nice, deep belly breaths. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Again, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Now with your eyes closed, I want you to visualize a place where you feel safety and comfort. This could be a fictitious place, or it could be a real place that you've experienced in your life. This could be somewhere out in nature, somewhere outdoors, a backyard. It could be indoors, it could be your childhood bedroom, or it could be at a relative's house, someone like your grandmother, where you always felt comforted and safe. So I want you to take a couple seconds and put yourself into that location. Now, in this place, let's start with our sight. I want you to look around in this place. Notice the tiny details. If you're outdoors, what are the plants and trees like? What does the sky look like? If you're in a room, what are the other objects in that room? What does the furniture look like? Spend about 5 seconds or so taking in everything that you see around you. Let's move on to our hearing. What are the sounds that are coming up? Are there animals around making noise? Is there music? Or is there just some quiet white noise humming in the room? Maybe an old air conditioning that you hear at your relative's house. Take in all that information from your sense of hearing. Moving on to smell. What do you smell in the air? Are there flowers, perfumes, maybe a little Florida water? Bring in that scent. Staying in this visualization, reach out and touch something. Is there an object that is familiar to you, that you know exactly what the surface feels like? Maybe it's a couch that you used to like to sit on, or a comforter on a bed, or blades of grass if you're outdoors. Experience that sensation and take in that information. And last, what can you taste? Is there a favorite food that reminds you of that place or that grandma's house? Is there something in the air that as you just open up your mouth, you kind of feel a sensation to remind you of that place? We'll just sit here for another 10 seconds, exploring all 5 of our senses, just really experiencing the comfort of this space. All right, guys, I want you to bottle up this feeling, this comfort that you're feeling in this space, and keep it with you. Know that you can always return to this. And slowly open your eyes. And we'll get back to the show.
Thank you, Mik. That was amazing. So let's get into it. Situational awareness. Getting our Jason Bourne on.
So as I said before, this to me is one of the most, if not the most, underrated aspects of preparedness. Let's talk first about what it actually is. What's the definition?
Okay, I'm going to put on my nerd voice. The official definition of situational awareness is the perception of the elements in the environment within a volume of time and space, the comprehension of their meaning, and the projection of their status in the near future. So what does that mean?
I mentioned this earlier, but that definition, right? It gets kind of quantum physics-y. It kind of goes into like our whole time episode that we did. It feels like there's like spirituality kind of in there, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But let's first talk about this from a preparedness standpoint. So the definition that you just read, it kind of breaks down into 3 parts. So first is like perceiving the elements in the situation. So that's taking in information with our senses. Then it's understanding the elements. So you're taking things in, and then now you're processing the information that you've taken in with your senses. And then projecting the future. So that's using that information to make an educated guess about the next course of events, right? So for me, like as I'm thinking about that, an easy example is when I'm driving, right? You take driver's ed and they talk to you about being like a defensive driver and taking in information and constantly scanning, right? And so, you know, a lot of times I can see like a car's behavior, even if they don't like use a signal light, and I'll just like, no, they're about to try to come over. You know, they're about to cut me off. I can kind of like feel it. And, you know, I think it's just noticing those things, like how they're like decelerating, maybe hugging the side of a lane. And I can say, okay, cool. Like I've assessed the situation, received their information, and I know I can, with a pretty educated guess, that they're going to try to jump in front of me, right? This is an easy like layman's example, I'd say.
Yeah. There's also some crossover with like intuition too, right? It's like you intuit that, but you might not be picking up on the specific inputs that are guiding that intuition.
Yeah.
I think for me, if I was just going to think about it in simple layman's terms, that it's just about knowing what's going on around you, like keeping your head on a swivel, knowing where the exits are, knowing who is around you, how they moving, etc.
Yeah. So I guess like, why is this important, right? Well, first off, I think we know that the military and law enforcement, they spend a lot of money training soldiers on situational awareness, because really it can be the difference between life and death, right? And thinking about like us in civilian life, if you will, unfortunately in America, we see a lot of examples, mass shootings, public violence. And as I think about those situations, I think, my belief is that situational awareness can really help people survive in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, I definitely agree. What's interesting about it, though, is that sometimes if you're constantly aware, I think our conditioning as a society would make you feel like you're just a highly paranoid individual. But it is important. I know. I always tell Mik this, like whenever if we're watching like something criminal-ish or even like a documentary or whatever, I'm always a little bit worried that if something went down, like the people who are like, they sit down with the sketchers and they're like, yeah, no, his nose was a little bit more bulbous. No, his eyebrows are bushy. I'm not clocking people like that. Like, I know what my boo looks like, okay? Could I sit down with an artist and like from scratch have them draw like
that's wild.
your nose?
You see me every day.
I see you every day. If I saw somebody just run out of a bank with a bag full of money in 30 seconds, they were like, yes, he was driving a 2004 Toyota Corolla. It was maroon. I did get 3 letters off the license plate. And maybe all of that's bullshit. I don't know. Like, they do that for the show. I'd be like, baby, I don't know. The car was kind of red. It might have been a Hyundai. I'm not sure. And they'd be like, girl, the car was blue and it was a Mazda. And I was like, well, damn, I don't know. Y'all don't have CCTV? What are you asking me for? This is not my area of expertise. But it is important.
So what are some basic tips that we, Jen included, can do to practice situational awareness? I mean, I think a lot of these feel like common sense and are easy, but so many of us don't practice them, right? I even find myself slipping sometimes. So I have to, come back to some of these basics. But the first thing is using all of our senses. And that was really what I was trying to bring about during the breath work, right? Really paying attention to sights, sounds, smells, tactile sensations, and even taste. There's so much information that we can get just from really being present and observing our environment. The second, identifying potential threats. Noticing people's behavior. Is anybody acting weird? Are there any visible or potentially concealed weapons around? Next, have a plan. We live in, again, a country that repeatedly has a lot of these incidents of public violence. So we need to have a plan in our head when we're out in public. What are we going to do? Like, who's going to do what? Like, how are we going to be able to quickly make our way to an exit? And then lastly, avoiding distractions. So if you're out in public, try not to get too absorbed in your phone. A lot of people have the AirPods in their ears everywhere they go. We're all guilty of it, but you really never know when something could go down. So try to practice being as present as possible when you're out in public. I think an example for me, I recently took our oldest daughter on a little like daddy-daughter date. We were kind of at the mall hanging out. We went to the food court, and I remember like taking a moment to decide where I was going to sit in the food court. Because I was like, okay, if somebody rolled up in here, like, well, I want to be close to an exit. I want to be able to quickly get behind some cover. And so like we sat by this like, almost like a kiosk that was like steel. That was like kind of no one was using it. Like I guess it was like if someone wanted to open up another restaurant booth,
Right.
it had like a little area. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit right by here. It wasn't far from exit. I knew I could hop over that thing if I needed to, and pretty quickly, between like 3 and 4 seconds, get us behind some cover or out the door.
Let me present this scenario to you. Just like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like on the fly. You don't know about this question, this situation I'm about to give you. So Mik was doing his spiritual retreat, his men's spiritual retreat the other weekend. So I had the girls by myself and we went to the park. And the way this park is set up, you come down a hill to get to it. So all of the cars and everything are up this pretty steep hill. And there was plenty of like families playing around, but there was this guy, and we've seen him before at this park. He was wearing like a weighted vest, a little tactical kind of situation. And he was kind of like creeping through like the hills of the park, like moving very slowly. Now, I think he was like training for something, but it was a little strange. So I was keeping an eye on him. But if he started shooting, I mean, like that's a very real concern in America. If he started shooting, what was I supposed to do? Like, how was I supposed to get to cover with 2 small children? I probably couldn't carry both of them. We would probably fall.
Fair. I think for me, if I couldn't carry them, I would have in my mind where the nearest cover is, right? So in that park, there's like the bathrooms that are a pretty solid structure. I would think about getting there. I think the trash cans are steel. Yeah. They're pretty thin, but I could still like, do something. The tables are concrete in that park. Okay. You could, lean behind one of those. Yeah. Get as low as you can and get behind one of those. So those would be my options. Okay. Just off the top of my head.
Yeah. I think that's when I get scared. Well, not scared. That's not the right word. I think it's very important to have situational awareness. I think the thing you have to be mindful of is not scaring yourself into becoming a recluse, Absolutely. Where you're like, well, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen. Okay, I'm just not going to go to the park anymore. Like, Yeah. Like it's so easy to get to that space versus focusing on the fact that you're aware and you're prepared.
Exactly. I think that's it. It's taking the 5 to 10 seconds to scan around and say, okay, if something happened, where am I going? And just having that knowledge ahead of time while you're calm before your hormones start to spike and that fight or flight response kicks in, you know where you're flighting to. You understand? So I think it's just that pre-planning. Yeah. So I think that kind of gives us an overview of situational awareness in, everyday situations. I did want to move and talk a little bit about a principle that comes up in preparedness, and that's actually called the gray man principle.
Does this mean that being ashy is being prepared? No. Like, are you ashy? I also don't look very good in gray, so I hope you're not making me wear gray.
No. Okay. The gray man principle is not about lotion or you having to wear gray. The idea is basically you want to blend into the surroundings. Think about someone wearing all gray. They're not really standing out. They're just kind of in the background. You may not even notice them, as opposed to someone wearing really bright colors. I have folks in my family, I have friends who, they grew up in the hood, basically. And when I've talked to them about this idea, they're basically like, oh, so you don't want to be like a mark or look like a lick that someone can just run up on, And yeah, that's basically what it is.
There's also, I was thinking about this. I actually knew what gray man principle was, y'all. I just was making a joke. I was thinking about this in terms of respectability politics.
Interesting.
This is a strange aside.
Okay.
Just go with me on this ride. But just about growing up, particularly our generation, millennials who were raised by boomers, of not drawing attention to yourself in white spaces, like in stores or whatever. Not like, don't dig around in your pockets or in your purse or, like don't be too loud. It's kind of this way to blend in so you don't attract negative attention.
Oof. Nah, you're right. Like I didn't even make that connection, but that's a survival mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's deep.
So, yeah, exactly. Same concept. You basically want to ensure, with the gray man principle, not racism, you basically want to ensure that you're not drawing attention to yourself, which might invite people to target you. So, some common things that people might do, which would violate this principle, include wearing clothing or accessories that are too flashy or attention grabbing. This could include things like brightly colored clothing, expensive jewelry, designer handbags. I'm sorry, the flyer you are, the bigger the target is. That rapper got murdered in LA at Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles because he was wearing like a really big chain and people saw him, and unfortunately that did not end well for him.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly important when we're talking about like a survival type situation, right? Like let's say there has been some type of disaster or whatever, and we're in this mode of trying to survive. The flashier you are, the worse it's going to be, right? People are going to think you have the resources and come after you. And so this gray man principle is particularly important when you're talking about these like emergency situations.
So if you're making a bug out bag and outfit and the boots, maybe we don't do Fenty head to toe. Didn't Gucci do something with with North Face?
Yes.
Maybe don't pull that out. I think those were some bright colors as well.
Yeah, we talked about that during our bug out bag episode. If you haven't heard it, go back and check that out. You don't want to have a Gucci bug out bag.
It would be fly though. Like if the world's going to shit, like why can't I have a little Gucci in my life?
You might not make it out.
You might not. You also don't want to have anything that stands out on your vehicle. We see this a lot with vanity plates. Ugh, that's a personal ick. I'm sorry if anybody has a vanity plate. It's just a personal, it's a no for me, dog. It's never that funny. They're never that clever. But you also don't want to have elaborate bumper stickers or decorations. These things are memorable and they provide information about you without you even realizing it. So let's say it really was like an apocalyptic type situation and you're driving around in like a really flashy yellow truck that's completely fitted out. And people are going to be like, oh, okay, they have fuel. The car looks clean. Like they have resources. Let's follow them. Let's hide in the truck bed. Let's see where they're going.
Yeah, and they'll also be able to like track your movements, right? Like seeing that car is going to stand out as opposed to if there's a bunch of white, black, gray Honda Accords going around. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to pinpoint which one was which one.
Yeah.
But you may be able to say, oh, the one with the vanity plate on the back, I've seen that one a few times. You know, like people can start to track you and where you are. And
the one that says zombie killer.
Exactly.
They're like, there they go. You also don't want to be too vocal or visible in public. This could include talking loudly on your phone, wearing headphones, ignoring your surroundings. Like this is also just a good tip in general. Basically, you don't want to engage in behaviors that draw attention to you. And then the last tip is being too friendly or open with strangers. While it's certainly important to be friendly and courteous to others, it's also important to be cautious and mindful of the information that you share with people that you don't know well.
Yeah, I think we talked about this maybe episode 1, operational security, where it's like you can't really disclose a lot about like the preps you have because it's almost like an advertisement for when stuff goes down for people to like come to your house.
Yeah, I think I talked about it then and I still feel that way. That's very tricky for me. It's very tricky because depending on the situation, you just don't know. Like you can make a rule like women and children only and a 12-year-old steal all your stuff. You don't know. So I'm still trying to navigate through that. How can we have enough issues now when things are quote unquote good about sharing resources as a collective, as a community, let alone when things are bad and dire, right?
Yeah. So I think those are some good tips. Covered the gray man principle, practicing everyday situational awareness. I do want to nerd out a little bit and talk about how situational awareness overlaps into spirituality.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting looking at it from that lens. And when you were talking about using all your senses and being aware of your environment and the breath work, it's all mindfulness. Like these are all mindfulness exercises. In certain meditations, we listen really intently to all of the sounds around us to see what we can perceive, and it's just a really good practice. And I think if the paranoia part of situational awareness kind of throws you off, maybe lean into the mindfulness of it and of just being really present. That's something we talk about a lot, about how we can dwell on the past, and that's not really good for our energy and our bodies. And we can worry about the future that hasn't even come yet, which isn't really good for our energy and our bodies. And that we're always supposed to be trying to be present.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like how sitting in this meditative space and really like going within and paying attention to what's going on the inside is really as important as paying like attention to what's going on the outside as well. It's like this duality that's happening with situational awareness and mindfulness kind of happening. So that's an interesting kind of lens.
I've been thinking a lot about indigenous practices, about how connected they were to nature, and how just even herbalism, like how they figured out what healed what. And it was this like knowing, like they didn't have to really worry per se. Like they definitely didn't have to worry about like what my boss is going to think about this spreadsheet that I prepared. Like they didn't have to worry about that. The seasons were the seasons. They spent time in nature, and they could be more present and observe how nature moved.
It's like the original situational awareness.
Exactly.
They were just like that perceptive of their environment that they could feel the energy of certain things and know what things were medicines, what things could potentially be poisons.
But like now, if you tell somebody, hey, like, why don't you just go to the beach and just watch the sun move across the sky until from sunup to sunset, and somebody might say that's boring, or they're like, that's a luxury. Like just being present and watching nature go about the course of its day is considered to be a luxury for us now. It's just an interesting way to think about where we came from and where we are now, and how a lot of this is just noise.
Wow, yeah. You mentioned something earlier too that I wanted to come back to about intuition. So we talked about the five senses. We went through those in the breath work and how important those five senses are to situational awareness. But I think we should also really rely on that sixth sense and really listen to our bodies. You know, a lot of us have tapped into our clairsentience, and we can go into a room and like feel the energy of the spaces and the people in the room. And I think we should really lean into that more, really like embrace that and rely on it, really. My sister was actually telling me a story the other day. She was walking down the street with her dog, and as she was approaching this woman on the street, she felt something. The woman was acting very erratically, and she had a pipe in her hand, and she set it down. The woman set the pipe down on the street. But there was something just off about this whole situation. And as she was walking closer, my sister heard a voice that told her internally, like, run, like this woman's going to hit you with this pipe. And she like made a beeline across the street and looked back, and sure enough, the woman had picked the pipe back up and was like chasing after her. Now, luckily, a car kind of got between them and distracted the woman, and my sister was able to get away and got to safety. But I think just listening to that voice is something that a lot of times we will ignore, and it will lead us into situations that are dangerous. So,
yeah. And like, how many times do we ignore even like the small things? Like there have been times where you felt like a voice told you to take your laptop when you left the house for the day, and you're like, I don't need my laptop, I'm gonna be back later, and then sure enough, like you needed it for something. And then I don't even know how I would have. Maybe I think I would have responded like, you know what, I'm across the street. But there would have been a small voice, but not the right one, being like, that's crazy. Yeah. She not going to hit you with that pipe. But you just never know. I think I'm just fascinated by the things we tell ourselves of how we shouldn't feel or how we should feel about certain things, you know, like it's just trying to find this balance and like this real strength in trusting our gut and ourselves and our intuition, that you can tell yourself, no, I'm being paranoid, I'm being crazy, this is not true, this is a slippery slope, you shouldn't think like this, but like not focusing on the fact that you're just being more aware of your surroundings and that you're being more protective of your space and your energy.
Definitely. Yeah, so interesting. When we were thinking about this topic, I didn't necessarily see the spirituality angle as much, but yeah, there's so much here.
I think the last thing I would say is if you're practicing like actively, like really trying to practice more situational awareness, and you're taking in what's going on around you in what may feel like a heightened type of way, that when you do come home to where you feel safe and where it's your refuge, then maybe you decompress a little bit. I like to burn sage just because I think like spiritually, energetically, you don't know what you're really picking up on by just being that plugged in. So I think that might be a really good practice for people, just because I think it's definitely an exercise that your brain is doing, that your body is doing, that your energy is kind of reaching out to make sure what's going on around you, that you might want to, you know, practice just like some spiritual cleansing practices.
Love it. Good tip. So I think that wraps up our discussion on situational awareness. Before we go, though, we do want to remind you to check out our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/chakras and shotguns. Lots of great bonus content, monthly readings with either me or Jen, and tons of other little goodies on there. So go ahead and check that out.
And finally, if you're loving the show, please subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Namaste.